going to ask, I'm going to ask Liz Liles to introduce herself first.
Good afternoon. I'm Liz Liles. I'm the founder and CEO of Daughters of Worth. We are a nonprofit organization with a mission to educate, equip, and empower girls of all ages to become strong women of influence in their communities. And we do that work through mentorship, advocacy, emergency needs, and providing trauma-informed therapeutic services.
Wonderful. Thank you, Liz. And Kevin, would you introduce yourself, please? You are muted, Kevin.
Rookie mistake. My name is Kevin Roughton. I am the special agent in charge of the computer crimes unit for the North Carolina State Bureau of Investigation. I am also the commander of the North Carolina Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force. The Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force in North Carolina is comprised of a little over 200 agencies, mostly police departments and sheriff's departments, that have designated points of contacts that are specially trained to investigate and partner with us to work for internet crimes against children.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you both for being here. And Melinda.
Hey, I'm Melinda Sampson. I'm the Community Outreach Coordinator for NC Stop Human Trafficking. Pam has told you about NC Stop Human Trafficking, so I certainly won't do that. But I did develop our internet safety curriculum, or well, our caregiver empowerment sessions around internet safety and talking about boundaries, consent, and pornography for caregivers, empowering caregivers to be able to do that.
Wonderful. Thank you, Melinda. So we're going to jump right in. I have a couple of questions for each of our panelists first, and then, as I mentioned, we're going to open it up and allow our participants to have some questions as well. And if you will, just be putting those in the chat box, in the Q&A box as we go along. So the first question is for Kevin. Kevin, can you help us understand what it is exactly that makes the internet unsafe for minors?
Sure. One of the main things that makes the internet unsafe is that we don't necessarily know who we're talking to when we're talking to someone online. So they could have any name that they wanted to, but that doesn't necessarily mean that's who they are. They can say they're from any place they want to, but that certainly doesn't mean that that's who they are. They can say that they attend any school that they want, or that they're any age that they want to be. And none of those things are necessarily true. So that's one of the biggest dangers, is that when we're talking with people online, unless we know that person in real life, we legitimately know who they are, where they live, how old they are, and things like that, we really don't know who we're talking to. We know what they want us to know about them through their profile or through information they give us, but that's not really true. The other thing is that most of the conversation that would go back and forth is text communication, whether it's in a chat message or an email or however we're communicating, and we miss many of the cues that we would probably pick up on in a verbal conversation. So when you meet someone, you're talking with someone, there's nonverbal cues and there's verbal cues. When you talk with that person, that you can pick up on things that are odd or out of place, or something's just not right. We get that weird feeling when we're talking to somebody. Most of those things are missing in an online chat. We don't really have those same cues. Many times as well, children lack the experience of social interactions, so they may not pick up on those cues as quickly anyway. So many of those things put together makes the internet, not that it's a dangerous place, but it is a very dangerous place. In and of itself, it's not dangerous, but the way that children use it sometimes can become extremely dangerous.
Kevin, thank you so much. That was a really good summary of why we need to be careful and teach our kids to be careful. So the next question is for Liz. Can you think of any examples, perhaps among the girls that you have worked with, Liz, where they've been approached online or groomed online?
Unfortunately, there's too many to even name. We recently just kind of did a poll working with our teens, girls, middle school and high school, which are really hundreds of girls throughout Pitt County schools this last year. And every single one of the girls that we surveyed, when we asked them if they had been solicited or had been messaged, inboxed, either through a sugar mama or sugar daddy or someone coming in through their inbox, every single one of the girls responded affirmative that they had received a message from someone, except for one girl. When I asked her, how in the world did you manage to not get inboxed? And she explained that she did not have a social media account. So that answered that question. But typically on average, these girls are receiving at least 1 to 2 messages per day, every single day of the week. They reported that it's coming in mostly through Instagram, Snapchat, if they have Facebook. A lot of them do not, but for the ones they do, they are receiving messages that way as well. So we're just seeing a lot of girls that are being messaged from a very personal level. We have also experienced a situation over this past year where one of the girls that we have served for quite some time was actually solicited and was groomed by a major trafficker across the country. And it was very methodical, very calculated in how he was able to solicit her online, to build that rapport, to build that relationship, to develop that trust, to offer incentives to her that were very appealing, and was able to solicit her and move her down a very dark, dangerous path. And so unfortunately, we're actually living that out through the organization right now and seeing that play out. But across the board, we're seeing this happen daily, where our girls are being solicited by perpetrators online.
Thank you, Liz. And that is a sad reality. Thank you for sharing with us. So, Melinda, can you help us understand some things that we might be able to do about it, particularly in terms of empowering parents to keep their kids safe?
Sure. Not to say that this is going to be the end all and be all, but these tips are going to be very practical and useful. But the first thing that definitely has to be there is that open line of communication. So it's important that children have a trusted person that they can talk with to ask questions and address certain issues, especially when we're talking about online safety. There will be things that children see online, like such as pornography, violence, substance use, that they're going to have questions about first off. And they need to have somebody to go to ask these questions. It's going to be very important that they have somebody to ask these questions to when they're experiencing predatory behavior. That open line of communication is going to be incredibly important to not only prevent abuse from happening to them, but also in empowering them to come forward when something does happen. Because a lot of times you'll see abuse happen and grooming happen and type of recruitment things happening online for youth, but they don't come forward and say anything about it. And that's because there isn't that open line of communication where they trust that caregiver to ask for help. Caregivers can also set consistent and reasonable rules around the internet and device use. So I've done quite a few caregiver empowerment sessions around this. And I'm going to say it would be completely unreasonable for caregivers to say these children cannot be online or use social media or gaming platforms, because they're going to do it. They're just going to not tell the truth about it. So that is not a reasonable expectation or a reasonable guideline. But what you can do is, again, maintain that open line of communication, but also teach them about healthy boundaries, healthy relationships, and that translates into internet use. You can also set consistent rules, like you can't use your devices during this time. You cannot charge your devices in your room at night and things like that. And you should also, as a caregiver, go by the rules you set. Don't say one thing and then not do it. I would also say that, we can't say these kids can't use the internet. So just like when they turn 16, we're not going to say they can't drive. We're going to teach them how to use a car safely. So now we just need to teach them how to use the internet safely. And really let them know that, there are people out there that can help them when they need help and guide them along the way. You just don't want to cut them loose in the big wide world of the internet without giving them the guardrails.
Thank you, Melinda. And as Melinda mentioned, she's done a lot of trainings specifically about helping parents to keep their kids safe. And you can go on our YouTube channel and find a recording of that webinar. She also created a handout that has additional tips to the ones that she just mentioned. And I put that link in the chat for you. So Kevin, what should we do if we see either someone, we think perhaps someone's being groomed online, or heaven forbid, we see some actual child sexual abuse images online? What should we do?
There's two main options. The first option is if it is something urgent, and you know that person, or this person is, you're the one being solicited, there's an urgent danger, then you need to call your local law enforcement, which here in North Carolina, like I said, we have over 200 partner agencies with police departments and sheriff's departments that have ICAC investigators in their department that know how to handle exactly these. So that is the probably best response for a quick response, because they have the investigator there. And if there is a danger, then that's what needs to happen. If there is something that you come across online and you don't necessarily know who that person is, or don't necessarily know where that person is, or it was in a group chat somewhere and you don't really, again, know who that person is or where they are, things like that, but it doesn't seem to be as urgent, and certainly it's not local to you, then the best place to report that would be the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. They have a cyber tip line, and you can call them. They have an 800 number, or they have an online reporting form. So you can just go to, if you just Google cyber tip line, then you can pull up their report online. You can copy and paste the username in there, copy and paste the link of where it was, provide all the information around it, and then they will triage that to try to determine, has a crime occurred, where does it look like the individuals are, and then they will provide that to the appropriate Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force, wherever that is in the nation. If it's in North Carolina, obviously it'll come to us, but the internet's worldwide, so it may not be local to you where you are. So that's the best way to get the information to the appropriate jurisdiction to investigate it.
Kevin, it sounds like there might be a time lag there from the time it gets triaged to the time that, my local Greenville Police Department receives it. Can you speak to that? How long might that be?
It really varies, but there definitely is a time lag, and there's multiple stages where that time lag happens. If you report something through the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, through their cyber tip line, again, they receive lots of reports, to the tune of millions of reports. So they're a little bit behind there. It's going to take a couple of days to get through there, and for them to do enough work on it to figure out where does this need to be sent, who can investigate it. And then when it's provided to the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force in that area, we're receiving thousands or tens of thousands of tips across just the state of North Carolina. So the same thing, for us to be able to look at it, to be able to determine where that is, who's involved, things like that, takes a little bit of time. And then usually there's a process for legal process to determine who this person actually is. So we have to look at the usernames or email addresses or phone numbers or other information to identify the person. And that legal process to get the information back from companies can take a little bit of time too. So each of those steps along the way can add to that time lag. So if you file a cyber tip report, this afternoon because you saw something online, odds are an investigator is not contacting you tomorrow to get more information about it. There is that time lag. And that's again why I said if it's something local or something urgent where you know that person, the best course of action is to contact the local police department or sheriff's department right then, so that they can respond immediately, and you don't wait that time lag for it to come through the process of the Internet Crimes Against Children Task Force and the National Center when there's somebody in danger.
Great. Thank you, Kevin. And that's what I was hoping you would do is just remind folks again, if it is something of an urgent nature, that they need to go ahead and call local law enforcement, understanding that it does take time to get from that hotline to a local law enforcement agency. And to our participants, Kevin provided us with some data about the cyber tips, and I wanted to share this with you. And, Kevin, if you want to speak to this, but basically I wanted you all to see, this is just for North Carolina. And so when we look at last year, there were 12,760 calls through the cyber tip line just for North Carolina. And you can look and see every year it's growing. And I'm assuming that last number there, Kevin, is just extrapolated for 2022.
Correct. That's the projection that we're on for 2022 is the number in red, that 17,000 there. And what I would say about this is of course, we expect over years, as more devices are put online, more people are online, more platforms are coming online, we expect to see an increase, certainly. And that's what's happened over the last 10 years or so, is a slight increase each year. In March of 2020, we all know what happened then. We saw that huge spike, and almost overnight, our tips began to double. Which really made sense. That kids went home from school, they were attending virtually, people went home from work, they were working remotely. Literally, there was more people online at the same time than ever before in the history of the world. But what we haven't seen is, as the COVID numbers went up and came down, and we've all seen the graphs and the charts about what COVID did, we don't see that same pattern at all hold true when it comes to online reports. We've seen them go up and then continue to go up and continue to go up. And even now they're continuing to go up. It's COVID, so to speak, for the beginning of the spike, but that can't hold true because most people are back to a normal way of life. Schools normal, people are working normal, but the tips are continuing to go up. And I think that just is evidence that we need to be more careful now than ever before. We need to educate our kids now more than ever before because of the danger that we know exists out there.
So Kevin, as the number of cyber tips has increased dramatically, has the number of staff at the cyber tip line and ICAC and North Carolina Internet Crimes Against Children increased at the same rate?
A quick answer to that is no. The cyber tip line is a private organization. They are a nonprofit, but their funding is still set. It takes a while for them to get additional funding to fund additional positions. The state of North Carolina is set on a budget, and it takes a while to get things put into that budget. And then for that, as things get added to a budget, for that to turn into actual positions in agencies. So we are at the mercy of the state budget for positions when it comes to the SBI. And we partner with local police departments and sheriff's departments, again, all across the state. The same thing, they're in that local government cycle of having to justify a position, ask for a position, maybe a local government or maybe the state budget will add that position, but it can't keep up with the rate of increase of what we've seen. So we are looking for new and innovative ways to work more efficiently and effectively. We've come up with some good solutions around that, but no, we are struggling to keep up because our manpower is very much the same as what it was a couple of years ago. And as you can see, our numbers have almost tripled or quadrupled nearly.
Yeah, so I wanted our participants to understand that so that when they don't get that call the next day, like you said, that they're not assuming that there are people who aren't doing their job. They're doing it just as quickly as they can. And again, just to reiterate, if there is something that you think is actionable immediately, if you've got that kind of information, to go ahead and call your local law enforcement. Don't call the cyber tip line.
Correct.
Right. Thank you so much, Kevin, and I'll stop sharing this. And I really appreciate you sharing this information, this data here, because it just makes it real clear how quickly those numbers went up. I'm going to take a look at the Q&A real quick. Someone wants to know, are there programs in communities teaching families or students to appropriately use social media?
I can answer this, Pam.
Well, why
That
don't
is
you
a great
answer it,
question.
Melinda?
So again, I'll plug us. NC Stop Human Trafficking has these programs. We are happy to do these in person or virtual, specific to the local area if that's what people need. You can always email me at melinda@encstophumantrafficking.org. But I will say, besides us, there are other organizations that have things. NCMEC has NetSmarts, and they have an exceptionally good program and curriculum that anybody can really implement. If you go to that website, which I will put in the chat, and we are also going to have it in the follow-up email. But if you go to that website and look at all the resources that NCMEC has around NetSmarts, that's a great way to do that too in your community, or in your household. Really, it's all a matter of what your community's like and what you're comfortable with. I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, the panelists are welcome to do that as well. I know that there is another ICAC training for caregivers coming up.
There you go. Well, Kevin just put in the missing kids. Great.
Thank you.
And if you want to, Kevin, you can put in that the training that y'all are doing next week. Or not, it's not you specifically, right? It's the national group.
Correct. The national ICAC program is putting on a training next week. And I just put another link in the chat for the ICACtaskforce.org. That is the national ICAC program. And under resources on that page, there are several resources there that are good and available. And then there's also the link for the virtual event on that same page. That's one of the resources there. So that ICACtaskforce.org link, and then just click on resources.
Great. Thank you both. Liz, are you aware of any other community programs that you'd like to share?
Unfortunately, I just do not see a lot that is being offered other than what you guys provide.
Thank you. Let's see what else we have in Q&A. Where does North Carolina compare to other human trafficking case numbers across the country? And I know that Melinda knows the answer to that. Does Kevin, would you want to speak to that, or Liz, or?
With regard to human trafficking, specifically for those numbers, I don't have those numbers readily handy because primarily we work, again, internet crimes against children, which may have some tie to human trafficking, but it's not the same thing. And it is different. I will tell you, in the ICAC world, out of the 50 states, although population-wise we're not near the top, we are near the top for the number of cyber tips we receive. So I think we're in the top 5 or 6, although population-wise we would not be in that top 5 or 6.
Thank you for that. So Melinda, would you like?
Yeah, thanks. As for the human trafficking cases, so here we go on the statistics here. They're not the end all and the be all. I can just tell you what the National Human Trafficking Hotline puts us at, and it's at number 9 in the nation. But hear me out. That does not mean that is a correct assessment. The Human Trafficking Hotline said there was 260 cases of human trafficking in this state, but that only includes calls to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, right? So we're not talking about local, state, and federal law enforcement agencies doing investigations. We're certainly not talking about domestic violence organizations responding to survivors, NGOs responding to survivors, and all those survivors that haven't come forward yet. So yes, we're ranked number 9 according to the National Human Trafficking Hotline, but again, that's the only number that's out there. And I wouldn't say that you should bet all your money on it as that being completely accurate.
Right. There are some efforts at the state level to try to consolidate the data from law enforcement agencies and service provision agencies, but it's just hard. It's hard to get people to kind of give up their numbers and get it all in one place so that we can accurately say what the prevalence is in North Carolina. There are folks working on it. Is the best answer that we can give to that. One thing that I will mention too is that when you're talking about, the number of calls that go into the hotline from North Carolina, we can say, oh, that's a shame that we have so many. Or we can say, there are a lot of people working on this issue in North Carolina. We've done a good job of getting the hotline number out there so that people are calling it. People are aware of it. And we may say the same thing, Kevin, with the cyber tip line, that we're higher than we want to be, certainly, but it could be that we are doing a better job in our state of publicizing that number and encouraging people to call. Because, we'll see some areas of the country that have really low numbers of calls. It doesn't mean they don't have human trafficking there. It means that it's not being identified. So there's kind of two sides to those numbers. Let's see what else we have. Is there a program that helps bring youth together to become more involved in sharing what human trafficking is? It seems like if we could get more young people involved, they could be sharing more information with friends and being more eyes and ears.
So peer-to-peer education is always going to be better than anything any nonprofit can go in and do. So I'm going to say that it would be great if youth would do that. And Liz could probably weigh in a little bit more on that, seeing she works with youth all the time.
Well, and yeah, of course. So yeah, I think the peer-to-peer is substantial. I think also removing the stigma around what we think trafficking is. And there's such this idea of it's the white van that shows up at Target and snatches kids up. And so having a good idea and understanding of what trafficking is, and being able to truly understand how it works and what it looks like. And trusting that gut feeling, understanding when you see things that do not feel right and go, well, why is this taking place in this specific way? But teaching kids the true red flags, I think that we would see a lot more movement in that space as we begin to really understand what trafficking is. And so that is one of my goals, is that we can kind of remove that false idea of what it looks like with actual, evidence-based reality of this is what we're dealing with and how we can come together. I do think there's a lot of interest in our community with trafficking as a whole. We just need to get the right information out there to be able to rally up against it.
And you can really apply what she just said to safe internet use at the same time, because safe internet use doesn't just prevent human trafficking, right? It also prevents cyberbullying and all kinds of stuff that go on online that's not related to trafficking, but definitely predatory.
Yes, and in terms of educating kids, here in North Carolina, we do have a requirement that sex trafficking be included in our sex education curriculum. We don't know that that's actually being done across the state because there is no tracking mechanism for that. And also there are a couple of groups across the state that have started these peer-to-peer groups like Melinda mentioned. There's a group out of Charlotte called Eagle's Wings that has, and I apologize, the name of their Youth for Abolition. It just came to me. And I believe that True Justice International also has a group that goes into schools, and creates sort of club type things where peers can talk to one another. So there are some efforts being made to do that. It takes a lot to get that done. I saw a question in here asking about the apps on phones, parental apps. And it says, my daughter has one of those apps on her phone that's supposed to tell her what sites my granddaughter visits. Do these apps really work? Because she pays no attention to me when I try to tell her what I've learned from these types of webinars. I'm assuming she means the granddaughter pays no attention. So anyone on this panel familiar with these apps that tell parents what their kids are up to?
Sure, I'll speak to that for a second. There are a wide variety of apps out there. And some are free and some are one-time costs, some are subscription-based monthly, and they kind of run the gamut on what you get and don't get. So we don't I don't specifically endorse one. We can't recommend one, but I would tell you to look at more than one. If when you're researching it, look at a few options. Don't just Google search it and click on the top one. Look at what the app does, what it's reporting, how it reports, things like that. And sometimes you do get what you pay for. So it may be that spending that couple dollars a month on a subscription will get you a lot more beneficial information than some of the free ones would. I would say in all of that, though, that none of the apps will replace a parent. We need our parents to be parents, and we don't need our parents to be apps. So the app has great benefits, and I'm not downplaying that or knocking them or saying don't use them, but it's a tool. And the parent really needs to be the parent. And if that standard is set, especially younger with kids, where they understand that mom or dad is going to look at that phone, and mom and dad make it a routine of looking at that phone, that is by far the most effective way, in my opinion, to see what's actually going on. A lot of parents have this idea of, my kid's got an Instagram account, so I'll follow their Instagram account and I'll keep up with what they're doing. But in the day and age of that we live in now, with so many private messages and direct messaging and multiple accounts and all sorts of other things, there's no way to do that. The only way to do it is to put the device in your hand and then look through it. And this is really a great conversation point, because I think parents maybe don't have some of the apps. They're intimidated by them. They're scared of them. They don't want to look like they don't know what they're doing. But the reality is you don't know what you're doing as a parent. You don't have the app, so you shouldn't know, but you have life experience. And so when you look at an app, have the conversation with your child of, hey, what is this app? What does it do? How does that work? And let them talk through it and tell you things. And when they start explaining how the app works, when you hear things that your life experience tells you, this is dangerous, this is a red flag, your life experience with their technical experience can make a really great protection package.
Sing it on the mountaintop there. That's exactly right. I did want to weigh in a minute and say that also, again, these apps are not the end all and be all. They're a good tool, but the devices that you have also have privacy settings that aren't going to allow those apps to work in some cases. So just understand what the devices you have, and if those apps would be beneficial on those devices. That's it.
Yeah. I think that was great, Kevin, that, and Melinda mentioned earlier, the very first thing in terms of online safety is, developing trust between the parent or caregiver and the child so they can talk about things. Because certainly they're smart enough to be able to hide what they're doing from us. And so, the idea is to make it so they don't want to, have that, they don't need to, to have that relationship. So,
and Pam, I'm gonna tell you, some of these kids have so many profiles, and they use so many social media apps that, they can keep up with it, but it's like you would have to do this full time to be able to keep up with how many profiles they have running, and that's not reasonable. So the best thing to do, the easiest, more efficient thing to do, is just have that open line of communication to understand where they're coming from. But anyway, yeah.
Awesome. Let's see. So an anonymous person is asking about policies. What policies are being presented to legislators to further protect survivors or provide more services to them? And what policies or programs that are in place could be better improved? Liz, I know you work directly with survivors. Would you like to speak to that?
You caught me off guard with that one. I was thinking that NC Stop with your workaround policy.
Well, I guess what I'm saying is, what the needs are. What should the policies be?
There's so many needs. I think I would put, if one of my, get me on my soapbox over here. In my dream world, I would love to be able to see where every organization that is servicing victims of trafficking are working from a same trauma-informed playbook, to be able to streamline the process that makes it a victim-centered service, if that makes sense. I think that we see a lot of different agencies who come in with different motivations or purposes or ways in which they do the work. And it's really difficult because when you're serving victims, you want to make certain that their best interest is always put up front, that they are prioritized in the way that they are served in that process. And so I'd love to see policy that provides a measure, but also accountability across the state to be able to, lack of a better term, vet agencies and organizations as we are referring out to them. Because the sad reality is that a lot of the organizations that are in this work may not necessarily be doing the work in a way that is in the best interest of the victim. And that just makes it harder on the other side of that. So if there was a way to provide a best practice model with an accountability structure, I think that is certainly a policy that needs to be in play.
Thank you for that. And I can speak a little bit to that. Again, I apologize. I know that we have some folks on the call that are not from North Carolina, but for here in North Carolina, our Human Trafficking Commission has been working on a set of standards for groups or agencies that do provide services to victims. And it is not at a point where, you know, service providers have to be licensed or anything like that. But what the hope is that there'll be, the first step's going to be, as I understand it, a sort of a self-assessment. There's going to be an assessment tool of whether or not an agency or a nonprofit meets the standards. And the commission can then help the agency work towards meeting those, whether they meet standards, fall short, exceed, I think is how it's going to, or something like that, how it's going to be. So, and one thing that will do, it'll be published, and that will assist agencies like, for instance, the Governor's Crime Commission, who funds a lot of these groups, and our General Assembly would also have access to this information to help them know who to fund. So it won't be an official vetting, so to speak, but it will allow everyone to know who is meeting or striving to meet those standards and best practices.
To shift gears a little bit towards the internet in general, policies around that, it would probably be a good idea for the federal government to like rein in tech companies. And I say that because a lot of predators go online, groom kids, get them to produce self-generated child sexual abuse materials. They send that to the perpetrator, and then they post it online, and they make money off of it on these platforms. So policy around kind of reining in some of the tech companies' platforms so that doesn't happen would be wonderful. But at the end of the day, we're going to need policy, and we're going to need the community and families to like come together on this basic understanding that you're not going to rush your way out of this issue. It's going to require a cultural shift, and it's going to require more people being supports for kids who don't know how to use the internet safely. They need guidance, and a lot of guidance. That would be my answer.
And just to speak,
if I can, I'm sorry. No, I say if I could piggyback on what Melinda was saying related to the tech companies, some of them do better jobs than others at reporting for child sexual abuse material, reporting to us. There is a federal law in place that if they find that content on their platforms or on their networks, they are required to report it to the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children. However, that is the end of the requirement. It doesn't say what they have to report or the information they have to provide about that. It just says they have to report. So some companies are really good about the information that they provide, and they provide enough information for us to be able to, as law enforcement, to be able to fully investigate what that allegation is and where it was and how it occurred and lots of information. But there's a lot of companies that don't provide nearly that much information. And in fact, almost make it extremely difficult for law enforcement to investigate. So even though there's a federal law in place that the incident has to be reported, if enough information for it to be useful isn't required, it kind of defeats the point of having the report mandated. So if we could put some federal policy or law in place of what must be reported and how it must be reported, then I think that would be extremely more effective than the current mandate to report.
Thank you, Kevin, because I was going to ask you, what do you need to make your job easier? And that I appreciate that. I was going to say, when Melinda was talking about reining in the tech companies, I was going to mention something called the Yarnett Act. And I see someone named Ron Tran beat me to it and put it in the chat box. And I appreciate that, Ron. Our nonprofit is very much in favor of the Yarnett Act. We have lobbied our senators, and one of our senators has co-sponsored it. And we are meeting with the other one, as well as our U.S. representatives. And so I would encourage those of you in North Carolina, certainly, to reach out to your representatives, first of all, to look up the Yarnett Act and be sure you agree with it, because what it does is place some additional requirements on tech companies to prevent child sexual abuse images from being on their platform, and has some consequences if they don't. So if you agree with it, fundamentally, if you would reach out to your representatives, that would be awesome. And of course, those of you in other states as well, because this is federal legislation. So do look that up and see where your legislators stand on that issue. Let's see what our other questions are. Is there a statewide task force or coalition of services? There are two different statewide groups, the Human Trafficking Commission that I mentioned, and their role is to suggest legislation around human trafficking to the legislators, and to suggest policy that state government agencies could improve upon regarding human trafficking. They are also in charge currently of dispersing money that was given to them to disperse by the General Assembly. So they'll be dispersing that to a number of different groups that work on human trafficking. So that group is appointed by several of the seats on the commission are based on a person's job, so to speak. So like the Secretary of Labor, the Secretary of Public Safety, has to be a representative from law enforcement. There's a representative from legal aid. Yes, some of them are because of their position. And then the rest of the positions on the commission are appointed. The governor appoints 3, the Senate Pro Tem appoints 3, and the Speaker of the House appoints 3. And so all of those are appointed positions to be on the commission. The other statewide group is the North Carolina Coalition Against Human Trafficking, and it's made up of a group of nonprofits from across the state. It's a membership organization. It does not deal with legislation at all. One of their biggest things they're working on right now is a survivor network and trying to support survivors. And then, of course, there's us, North Carolina Stop Human Trafficking. We don't deal specifically with service provision. And unfortunately, the General Assembly did not give us a ton of money to give away. But we are working on the things I mentioned earlier: education, coalition building, and legislation. So we do have different groups that are working on it. And in some areas, groups are trying to pull together. For instance, our nonprofit and 2 others are really interested in the idea of demand reduction, which is quite related to online safety, actually, to reducing the demand for the purchase of sex, for instance, which many argue could be reduced by reducing access to pornography, which is an online safety issue that we really haven't talked specifically about. So there is a lot going on with those issues. And I am sure that, well, I know we would appreciate input from any of y'all that are here and value that. And the coalition would as well. As I mentioned, the commission would accept your input, but it's not a thing you could say join without being appointed. Let's see what else we have. Are there any public organizations actively promoting the concept of human trafficking to be more acceptable that we should be aware of?
Not that I know of. Nobody really likes human trafficking, but okay, nobody's gonna say let's support human trafficking, to be clear. But you will have organizations that don't want to rein in tech companies, right? We're gonna, like, the tech companies themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't mean to laugh, but like, they're not, a lot of tech companies aren't very interested in that. And things along those lines. So I guess it would take some deductive reasoning skills to really see who supports reducing human trafficking, and how, if they're, I hope that answer makes sense, because no one's going to come up and say, you know what, I think human trafficking is great. I think online predatory behavior is wonderful. But their actions speak much louder than their words when you're talking about certain policies to implement, when you're talking about shifting a culture around talking about healthy boundaries, what consent is, when you're able to talk about pornography, the harms of pornography openly, when you're able to have that when people combat the idea of comprehensive sex education in school, then they're also saying, maybe this will facilitate exploitation, but we don't want to have this hard conversation. So that would be my answer to that. I would, unless Pam, Liz, and Kevin know of any organizations that are really cool with human trafficking. I could be completely wrong, but I haven't seen one yet.
I think what we're talking about here is vocabulary, but Kevin, you go ahead.
No, so I don't know of a specific organization, obviously, that would promote human trafficking. I will say something that's come onto our radar recently, and I'm not going to name their name to give them publicity, but there are 2 organizations that have come out recently that are gaining a lot of traction, national traction, trying to do away with sex offender registries. And that seems to be trending very hard. And in fact, one of those organizations had a national conference of their membership in Raleigh last week. So it is hitting very close to home. They are citing a couple of statistical surveys that show recidivism rates and things like that, or reoffense rates, and saying that the sex offender registry is not a needed thing. It doesn't protect, et cetera, et cetera. I would just tell you that in what we see every day on investigations we run, we see registered sex offenders repeatedly over and over and over again that are suspects in our cases and are the ones offending against kids. So it is of great concern to us. So not the same topic of what the question is, but very similar. It's one of those organizations that it's not promoting it, but it could be a huge policy change that could really change the landscape of where we're at with internet crimes.
Thank you. Thank you. And what I was going to say, as Melinda said, nobody is going to say I'm in favor of human trafficking. But it comes up, I guess, with a philosophical difference of many anti-human trafficking groups will tend to almost equate prostitution and sex trafficking. That very few people, you know, for instance, our organization believes that almost no one wants to prostitute themselves. That you don't run into anybody who says, oh, when I grow up, I want to be a prostitute. They end up in that situation because they don't have any other choices, or they don't perceive that they have any other choices. And so there is this movement from groups that call themselves sex workers that want to legalize sex work. And because so much so-called sex work actually does involve people who are being prostituted, our organization is against that. There are several, so that there are groups that are trying to do that are trying to get sex work legalized. And the people, I think it would be interesting to look to see who is funding those organizations, who would benefit from that. I think would be a very interesting thing to see. Another group that is trying to get traction, and I've heard more about it recently, are these groups of people who think that it is permissible for adults to have sexual relationships with children, and think that children should be able to consent to that. And that you know, that concept just really hurts my heart that anybody would join forces with that kind of an idea. So I guess from what Kevin said, and then these couple of groups that are out there that I've mentioned, you know, none of them are saying I'm in favor of sex trafficking or human trafficking, but like Melinda said, they're going at things, at pieces of it that are going to make human trafficking easier.
And just to be 100% clear, when she was talking about the legalization or decriminalization of commercial sex, we at NC Stop Human Trafficking don't believe victims should be arrested, but we do believe the buyers and the third-party controllers should be. I just wanted to be super clear about that, and I'm going to mute myself now if we have.
I appreciate the clarification, Melinda. Thank you. Does anyone else have any questions? I am looking through, and a lot of these were kind of related to
If it's okay, I just want to mention as well that I just think it's important for people to understand how calculated this is. Like in the same way that you would create a business plan, if you have, you know, a dream to create this business, that these perpetrators, these traffickers have got a very set, specific agenda for how they solicit, how they communicate, how they are able to connect with that girl or that guy and get that information from them. In fact, sitting here, I have got Pimpology, which is the 48 rules of the game. You know, it tells you exactly on page 22, you know, if there's not a vulnerability, a flaw or weakness, you create one. It is the playbook for how they do this. There are courses you can take. There's a conference that happens. So this is not something where someone is just coming in and throwing words out there. I mean, in some ways it may be, but the majority of these that are coming in to solicit have got a very distinct, rigid, structured agenda and have been taught and trained psychologically how to build, how to groom, how to get these girls to pour out their life stories and to prey on that vulnerability, and then take their very words and use it against them, making themselves to be as if they are the end all be all to get them to the space that they need to be. And I know it's been mentioned several times here already, but having that one person, having that connect person, having that safe person that for these youth to be able to connect with and know that they have got somebody that at some point in this conversation, I tell our girls all the time, you know, if you've got a gut feeling and you're talking to somebody and you feel like that something with this is off, trust that gut feeling, because more than likely something is off. You don't know who you're talking to. You don't know who is on the other end of that. But just being well aware I think is just important for us to understand that this is not haphazard. This is intentional, methodical, planned out solicitation of minors.
And they are going, the most efficient way to do it is online, right? I mean, they're going to go and pretend like they're somebody else, different age, a different person, different gender, whatever that person wants them to be, develop that relationship. And then after that relationship and that trust is developed, they're going to ask for those self-generated child sexual abuse materials, or what the young folks call it is sending nudes. So they're going to ask for those photos. And those kids are going to send them because they think they're in this wonderful relationship. And once those photos get out, they're out. And then that could start the cycle of sextortion, all kinds of things that can go sideways when this happens. That's why it's really important for caregivers to not only talk about internet safety with their kids, but also talk about boundaries and bodily autonomy, what consent is, healthy relationships, what's good at a good exchange and what's a bad exchange. And they need to start talking to them at early ages. That's it.
Well, y'all, I was so involved in this conversation and so enjoying it that I did not notice that it is 3 o'clock. I think we could talk about this topic for a long time. And I just want to say a huge thank you to Melinda and Kevin and Liz for being here and for being our experts and sharing their knowledge and experience and expertise. I really appreciate all of y'all attending. And I hope that you have found something here today that's helpful to you. And I hope that you'll share some of this information. You know, maybe it'll prompt a discussion with your own kids or grandkids, or that you'll talk with a coworker about this, and, you know, help us spread the word about internet safety. As Melinda alluded to earlier, she is going to send out a follow-up, and she'll have the links that we've shared in the chat in that follow-up. So if you weren't able to get them here, then she will share those with you. Again, I just want to say thank you. And if you have additional questions, or if you would like to learn more about these topics, let us know and we'll try to assist you. Or if you'd be better assisted by another agency, then we'll connect you to them. So thank y'all very much for being here.